All right. Hey, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this 36th DEM I Wonder webinar. DEM has so many services, offerings, programs, and hidden gems that we would like to share with all of you. And we're excited to just take a few minutes to highlight these features in our webinars. The Utah Division of Emergency Management is hosting this webinar series aimed at providing local emergency managers with relevant content and opportunities to enhance their capabilities and knowledge. Webinars are live for Q&A and recorded for later viewing on the DEM website and YouTube channel. Some of these webinars are seminars or workshops with hands-on portions which will allow emergency managers to become oriented to a DEM process or test a DEM product. So our schedule today will be as follows. We will start with our ground rules and etiquette. Next, we'll have a brief presentation by Skylar, Josh, and Kelly, and they'll present on I Wonder how to use project management and emergency management. Following the presentation, the presenters will be available for a Q&A session. Following the Q&A, we will close with a short message about the upcoming webinars. So the ground rules today are fairly simple. Please mute your line while the presenters are presenting. If you have a question, you may type it into the group chat or unmute at the appropriate time to ask your question. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. So with that, thank you for your attendance today, and I will turn the time over to Skylar, Josh, and Kelly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today to talk a little bit about project management and emergency management. And I'll just lay it out here right up front. Today's session is just a few glimpses of project management. I'm sure we could probably devote a whole little mini series as we explore project management and all of its facets and how it intersects with emergency management. But today we're just going to kind of hit the surface, compare the two, and share a few tools with you today. So we'll dive right in. So as we all know, emergency management, everybody has a different perspective of what emergency management is. And in some regard, we do a little bit of all of these perspectives. I don't know. I don't personally walk around looking like Superman, but sometimes some of my projects and some of the work I do, people think I am Superman. I know in previous roles, a lot of people thought I was, as you can see there on the top right, what society thinks I do. They think I put out fires, or in my case, I did a lot of flood mitigation or just throwing of sandbags. But as you can see in that lower right, that is what I do a lot. And I'm sure that's what a lot of you do as well, sitting down and spend a lot of time planning and coordinating, especially nowadays with these virtual meetings in front of a computer. The same can be said for project managers. There's a lot of confusion out there with what exactly a project manager does. So this is just to highlight some funny things that some people think, different perspectives of project managers, but they really are very similar. And there's a lot of crossovers between project managers and emergency managers. So just to look at a few ground definitions. So emergencies and emergency management. So as you can see, emergencies are often a specific situation that is requiring immediate action. A disaster is, again, often a sudden event, an accident, natural catastrophe. You could also say a disaster is comprised, in many cases, of multiple emergencies. There's multiple facets that create a disaster. And as you can see, emergency management is the managerial function charged with creating that framework to reduce that vulnerability and cope with those disasters. So it brings an organized approach to coordinate and address disasters and emergencies that are happening. And when we look to see what an emergency manager is, I looked far and wide to find a definition of emergency manager, and I couldn't find a single place. Not FEMA, not NEMA, not IAEM. I couldn't find a single place that described and defined an emergency manager. They all defined emergency management very similar. So, no wonder there's a lot of confusion about emergency managers. But if we take that definition I do have up there of a manager as someone who's responsible for controlling or administering all or part of an organization, and you just put that in the context of a disaster or emergency, it fits. It really, an emergency manager is that one that carries out that coordinating function. So next, we'll take a look at projects and project manager. So as you can see, a project is defined as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique project, product, service, or result. Um, a program is a group of projects or similar activities that you can group together and coordinate together. So very similar. If you want to look at and compare those two, very similar to an emergency is a temporary endeavor. And disaster is that grouping of emergencies. So very similar to a project and program. You can see here the project manager is a profession in the field of project management, much like emergency managers. Emergency management is a growing professional field. And here project managers have the responsibility of the planning, procurement, and execution of the project. So again, those managerial functions related to the project. And then project management is that responsibility of the manager. It's that part that's taken care of and applying those tools and techniques to accomplish and see the project through to the end. So by comparing those two, you can see already we have a lot of similar crossover. We just have different words and different language to approach the things, but a lot of activities and a lot of our focus between emergency management and project management don't stray too far from one another. So another area where you can see crossover is in skills that are required. So here you can see a list of skills for a project manager divided into soft skills and hard skills. So if you just take a moment and look at those lists and start checking off to yourself how many of those are critical in the field of emergency management. I'm looking at the soft skills list. As emergency managers, we collaborate, we communicate, we're all about teamwork, we're major problem solvers, we have our tools and techniques to help us organize, time management, leadership, conflict resolution, critical thinking, all critical skills in the field of emergency management. And then some of those hard skills carry over as well. Task management, think of the ICS process and developing those objectives and goals of an incident response and managing those tasks by applying those resources to it. Um, Dealing with changes in your plan that you develop through that incident action planning process. Whether it's you didn't get a task completed or a new weather event has come in or another emergency in the disaster has popped up, causing you to have to change your approach. So you can see there's, again, a lot of crossover, not only in what we do, but the skills that both professionals are required to have. So, what makes a project manager great? I would say it's very similar to what makes an emergency manager great. Having that collaborative mindset, that attitude of whatever it takes, we'll get this done. That ability to build trust and confidence in others, because we all know we can't do it alone. And I know many of us come from shops of one. I've been in that shoes, but even in that shop of one, we have to build that trust and confidence in others to support each other in those instances. We also have to have that superior judgment and decision making skills. I mean, some of the hardest times to make decisions are in an emergency. Stress levels are high, a lot is on the line, and we both need to be able to do that. Having that clarity of purpose and action, knowing what you need to do and how to do it, and what you need to do to accomplish it, carries over both in project management and emergency management. And what's key, another some other key aspects are, as you can see that in the ability to inspire, connect, persuade, facilitate, working with others to find that common ground to solve the problems at hand. So again, a lot of what makes a great project manager is what makes great emergency managers. And so here we're going to start, after this good comparison, we're going to start to shift a little bit to kind of that application of project management in emergency management. And with the three of us, myself, Kelly, and Josh, being from the planning section here at DEM, we're going to take a planning perspective of that. There's other, and this is where I could say we could dive into several other instances of exploring different facets of emergency management and how project management can apply. But today we're going to take a planning approach. So one of the key components where project management plays in, and it's growing in the emergency management process, particular to planning, is with um, the Community Preparedness Guide 101 or CPG 101 and its six-step planning process. Um, so I'm sure all of you are familiar with the six-step planning process that's described in this guide. The six steps are right here. You can see forming a team, understanding the situation, determine your goals and objectives, develop your plan, prepare and review the plan, implement and maintain the plan. So this is set to develop a plan. And this is not your incident action plan. This is your deliberate pre-incident planning context. And so we're familiar with this process, and over the let's see. So next, I'll show you the five project management process groups, and then I'll show you how they relate to this six-step planning process. So project management at its base is the fundamental methodology is called waterfall or traditional project management, and it's divided up into five process groups, as you can see here. First, you have initiating, and that in initiating is where you define your project, its vision, and its overall scope. You have your idea. What is it that you need to accomplish? Kind of that general high level. What is it that we're trying to set out to do, and why are we trying to do that? With those high level details, you can then move into planning. So you start to assemble your team in initiating, you move into planning, and you start to establish that more detailed scope and define the actions, identify the resources, and start to set a timeline that's required to meet those objectives that you've laid out. And then once you've got your plan set, you can dive into executing that plan. Once you've acquired those resources, you have the buy-in and the sign off and everything's, you got your green lights, you dive into executing, where you start doing the work that you've planned out. But with that executing, as you can see, the next process group or next phase is that monitoring and controlling. I mean, that takes place and as things are executed, things may need to change. The environment changes, requirements change. You come across an instance where you may not have the right resources or an unseen problem comes to light. So you're monitoring, you're checking your progress on those. And then your controlling features are, do I need to change my plan? And how do I need to change my plan? So that's why it circles back to planning. And as you're executing, you're continuing to plan and address all those needs that arise. And once you get your project or your product into a point where you're ready to, you've met your requirements, you move into that last process group or the last phase of closing, where you do your final presentation to the project sponsor, the ones that have asked for it. You get that final buy off, sign off um, for plans. This is your promulgation and where it becomes an active plan. Um, so those are the 5 project management process groups. And so here we can see I've overlaid the 6 planning steps from CPG 101 with the 5 project phases. So you can see how, as you go through those 6 steps, you really are working your way through those 5 phases of project management. So, like I was explaining, the initiation phase, you're understanding your situation. What is it that we need to do? How do we want to go about doing it? And we start putting together the team to accomplish those goals. We start to define those goals and the objectives in step 3, and that starts to set us up um, in transition to that planning phase where we're defining those. What is it, those steps that we actually need to take? What is that work? Which carries over into step 4. You're developing that plan. You're developing your course of action to what, who do you need to have involved? Who are the stakeholders and whatnot. And then step 5, you're preparing. So you're executing, you're working, you're developing that plan, and you're reviewing that plan for feedback. You're checking with your stakeholders. Did I capture this right? Is this actually a capability that we can do? Is this what will happen given the resources we have in this kind of event? You're working through all that kind of stuff, and that's your execute and monitoring and controlling phases of a plan development. And then with plans, there's also that executing element of implementing the plan and closing out, um, as well as that implementation. So as I was referencing, that's your promulgation, your official sign off with your agency, making it an active plan, and that plan now becomes um, you have to develop a strategy to maintain it, which could be part of that monitoring, controlling, that executing. It would open up the door to maybe not go back completely through this process, but at least dive back into an abbreviated process. So hopefully that can kind of has illustrated a little bit of um, what we know in emergency management from a planning perspective of developing our plans, and how that overlays and what we really are doing is project management when we're developing those plans. So you can kind of see that you're doing it without really knowing you're doing it. So um, up next, this next we'll start transitioning over to some of the tools and some of the things that we want you to take away from this webinar. And so first up is a helpful tool that we want to share with you is the project charter. But before I go into these helpful tools, are there any questions? Now, I don't see any in the chat, but if anybody has a question, wants to raise their hand, ask it, feel free to jump in right here. Over what we've talked about so far, the skills, um, and how they relate, this comparison with CPG 101. So one of the helpful tools that we want to share with you today is the project charter. And the project charter is a document that is key to be developed in the initiation process group, or that initiation phase. As you can see, the charter formally authorizes the existence of the project and provides the authority in applying the resources and kind of organizing project activities for the project. So it's basically written out at a really high level, going over all aspects of the project. So it's all there laid out black and white for everybody involved with the project to see it and really to agree to. And ultimately, you want everybody from the sponsor, the one who's requesting the project, to the project manager, and those that are responsible for the deliverables to sign off on it, to really, put pen to paper and say, yes, this is what I'm agreeing to be a part of. Project charters can take uh, the shape of all kinds of things, and really it depends on how big your project is. As you can see, they can range from one page to many pages. And later on, we'll send out the slides and we'll send out these links of different resources for you. But Asana here gives a great overview of project charters and shows you a great example of a one-pager, almost memo style, that gives you just those key elements of what you need for that project. And then other projects can range in their number of pages just to fit their scope, cover everything. So with that, scope is key for everybody to understand where they're at and what they're going to be doing. And scope is always laid out. Those objectives are laid out and captured in the project charter. So we never want, it's one of the big troubles with projects is scope creep, as you can see here. We That's one of the biggest things we fight in project management, is that scope creep. So up next, we're going to turn some time over to Kelly to share an example of how she took this tool of a project charter and implemented it in one of her current projects, working on the equitable communications planning. So Kelly, if you want to come up, I'll turn the time over to you to share your example with us.
Thank you, Skylar. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Basically, this tool, the project charter that Skylar's been referring to, has been exceptionally helpful for me and my teams to take broad requests and turn it into more digestible tasks and overall projects. So with this particular example, a request had come from the governor's office for us to invest our emergency planning efforts into better serve our communities and our public information efforts. And what this would look like, the actual product of this request would be collaborating with DEM, plus with the Division of Multicultural Affairs and with the Utah Department of Health, to incorporate equitable communication strategies into our ESF 15 public information and our Joint Information Center plans. So with that being, a little broad and needing to bring things together, this gave us a really good template to bring together a group for a preliminary meeting. So I was able to get our team together within those divisions and together hone in on scope. And when you go through the outline, you'll see it really helps lay out those points that hone in on scope, such as objectives, high-level requirements. So we collectively were able to establish 7 objectives, 2 high-level requirements, 2 major deliverables, and we decided on our 3 boundaries. This is good because there are certain things that you'll see on the outline, such as cost, which don't apply to us, and it's flexible enough that we can leave that out. And along with that, we were able to take this same process to define our roles and responsibilities. So we were all clear on what our tasks were and why we were there. And finally, gave us a good segue into making sure we're all on the same page of who our stakeholders were and our team members. Basically, this tool took a meeting that could have become just a loose brainstorming session and gave us some structure. From that, I'm gonna turn back over to Skylar. If anyone has any
Hey,
questions. Oh,
Kel,
sorry.
yeah. Hey, so Mr. Millett dropped a question in the comments, and it said he asked, "So how does this apply to alligator management? Alligators are what shows up in my email, on my phone, and at the office each day, which needs to be balanced around the demands of what is on the calendar that day and what is left of the avalanche of things to do from previous days." He then follows up with the Bob Ross comment and says, "Busier than a frog in a blender trying to avoid blades." Just saying.
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question. I'm sorry. I'm a little slow at trying to understand. Mark, could you either come on and ask that maybe in a way a little differently, or can someone else answer that?
I was probably just being a bit more of a smart aleck on that. This, your processes here are great. It's just interesting, and I know many of us do already live just against the wall. It feels like so much of the time, and it's the magic of what you guys do is having the time to slow down and to implement this stuff. Which at some point in time we got to do it, but boy, it's just tough when you're in the grinder every day. So I wasn't meant to bring that up. I was just to be a smart aleck. Sorry.
No, thanks for that clarification, Mark. And you're right. This project management really is a methodical approach. That waterfall approach is laid out for you to plan out your activities. Take that time, develop what you need for a specific project, and then schedule it out. Um, this approach that we're talking about today is not intended to be that day-to-day management of your time and balancing of those tasks. This is like a big overarching project that can last 2 weeks to 2 years. And planning that all out, you definitely still do face the day-to-day, as you call it, alligator management, where you have to juggle everything. It's still a very relevant part of both emergency managers and project managers. So just remember, what we're looking at today is that higher, longer term view of management. So, but great question, great comment. Thanks for bringing that up. And thank you, Kelly, for sharing that example. Does anybody else have any questions about a project charter that we can, from the example or just in general, that we might be able to clarify? So yeah, it's Joel. That's a great connection there. So Joel dropped in the chat for everybody. He says the one place that using project management techniques can help with alligator wrangling is time trade-off. So say your fire will take X time to address. So all this other stuff will be pushed back by that much. And that's true. As the new fires of the day pop up, project management does have those change orders that can help address that, but it will, as Joel points out, often extend your time. So thanks for sharing that, Joel. All right, if nobody has any questions for project charters, we'll jump over to the next tool that we want to share with you. And that tool would be the work breakdown structure. And this can be found when you're deep in that planning process group, and when you're identifying the tasks that need to be done and the resources that need to go with those. So as you can see, a work breakdown structure is defined as a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by the project team. And it captures all the tasks. So this is one of those 100% rules. We want to capture everything that we need to do for this project and make sure it is accounted for and represented in this work breakdown structure. So as the quick little example shows on the slide, so if you're building a bicycle, the brake pads might be one of the smallest components, but you don't want them to be overlooked. Just to reemphasize, you want to make sure you're accounting for every component, no matter how small it is. You want to make sure you're accounting for that. And that work breakdown structure, as you go through developing one, that exercise gives you that in both a graphical representation or in a word representation. And Josh will dive in a little bit more to share from one of his examples of how he's used work breakdown structure on one of his recent projects. So Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Skylar. Really appreciate that. And one of the examples that I wanted to share with all of you today is a project that I've been working on, leading a cross-sectional team of folks here at DEM to talk about the way that we manage our data. I'm a GIS person by trade, so that's kind of the perspective that I have come to that project with. But knowing that many people in many different functions in our agency are creating and collecting data, and how can we establish some data governance and standards so that we can approach our data better and manage things more cohesively. So I've used a work breakdown structure in that project, and it's been immensely helpful to me. But to show you kind of a quick example of why you need a tool like this, Skylar, go to the next slide. So you can always count on XKCD to come up with some relevant examples. If you've read the book Getting Things Done, they talk about some ways that you can just manage general tasks and not necessarily projects, but just trying to like take care of the way that you do your own work. And in the Getting Things Done process, they had mentioned that one of the things, the focus areas where you miss out the most is just trying to capture everything that needs to be done. And in the context of project management, a work breakdown structure is so helpful because it captures everything. And of course, sometimes when you're working methodically through a project like this, you resemble the person on the left, where you're working on all of your problems, and at the end of the day, you still have all of your problems, but they're just in a spreadsheet. But at least you've captured them. And I've run into a number of projects where just being able to list out every single thing that needs to be done made me feel a lot better in terms of being able to prioritize work and set things up in a certain order so that everything gets done in a logical way. Conversely, one of the things that is very critical in project management, as Skylar was alluding to, is scope creep and identifying what the actual scope is to get your project completed. And as a GIS person, I have been in the situation of the person on the right several times, where someone makes an initial request and they will come to me and say, Josh, I need you to make a map that shows this area and it needs to have these data layers on it. And I say, oh yeah, I've got that data and I understand what this is. And I plug away at it for a few hours and then bring it back to whoever made the request. And they take one look at it and say, well, that's not what I wanted. And I think one of the things that is essential for why a work breakdown structure is so helpful is that you can try to identify that scope up front. And so if you want me to make you an app that just takes a location of a photo and says whether or not it's inside of a national park, that is a fundamentally different problem than trying to capture that picture and see if that picture is a picture of a bird. But if anyone wants to give me a research team in 5 years, I'm happy to plug away at that. Let's go to the next slide, Skylar. These two graphics are kind of where my current project had started and where it's at now, in terms of trying to use a work breakdown structure as a tool for us to establish a meaningful clarity of purpose. And so on the left was kind of how our group had come together. We held a few meetings, and we did a really good job at getting folks to agree that the work that we were talking about in terms of managing our data was something that we all cared about, and we wanted to work together to find a solution. So we did some digital whiteboarding, and we had some sticky notes, and we identified a couple of actions and maybe a couple of outcomes. But when Skylar had kind of shown me what a work breakdown structure could do and how that could apply to this project, that was my aha light bulb moment, where I was able to say, here's how big this project actually is. And going from the sticky notes on the left to the hierarchy on the right really didn't alter the actual scope of the project, and it didn't really change what the deliverables were, but it allowed me to take a hard look at things and say, oh, this is really how big this project is, and this is how long it could take to get through all of the steps to complete the work. And we'll talk a little bit later about managing stakeholders in a project. And I think one of the things that a work breakdown structure has been so beneficial for me is to identify each of the deliverables that all of my stakeholders will care about. Because certainly in a project that is large and complex, you don't want to have a stakeholder who is very passionate about one tiny piece of the project and have that have the project get derailed if that person feels like their component of the project isn't getting the correct level of attention or something like that. Let's go to the next slide, Skylar. So just as kind of to bring it home with the work breakdown structure, the purpose of that as a tool is to give you that level of clarity in like what is everything that must happen so that I know that I'm done. How do I know when this project is actually complete? And it doesn't necessarily mean that by creating a spreadsheet or a hierarchy that all of the work is necessarily up to you. This is where you identify all of the folks in your team and can say, okay, I know that I've got individuals on my team that can handle components of these projects. So it's not up to me to do 100% of the work, but it is up to me to understand that 100% of the work gets done. And you can track other things in a work breakdown structure, like which tasks are dependent upon other tasks or who's responsible for doing them. But fundamentally, it's trying to understand that you know all of the tasks that you need to complete to get the work done. So I hope that's a useful overview of a work breakdown structure, and I'll turn it back to Skylar to talk about stakeholder management.
So our next tool, as Josh was alluding to, relates to stakeholders. And as we know in emergency management, stakeholders are everywhere. But we often don't know who our key stakeholders are or how best to manage our stakeholders. So one of the helpful tools that we want to share with you today is relating to stakeholder management, which starts in the initiation process group, but it is carried out through the whole project. So some of the questions we want to ask and find the answers to when it comes to stakeholder management is, are we talking to the right people at the right time and in the right way? So identifying what's defined as a stakeholder in the realm of project management and the PMBOK is the Project Management Body of Knowledge. So the 7th edition of that defines a stakeholder as an individual, group, or organization that may be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project, program, or portfolio. So just by that definition, I'm sure that just rapidly expanded everybody's current stakeholder list for whatever project or plan you're working on. If you start to account for those that perceive themselves to be affected by it, not just the ones that we know are directly affected or are directly involved with it. So a couple of things to help with stakeholder management that we want to talk about are power influence matrix or grids and responsibility assignment matrix. So first up is the power interest grid, or the power influence, or the impact and influence grid. This is an example of it. So basically what this grid or matrix wants you to do is identify your group, your stakeholders that you've identified for your project. And then as you're analyzing them and figuring out how they'll impact your project, you look at their level of authority, which can relate to power, the level of concern about the project's outcome, which is their interest in the project, the ability to influence the outcomes of the project, which is the influence, or their ability to cause change to the project's planning or execution. And as you as you assign those to every one of your stakeholders, you can then take this grid and you can start to plot them out. And wherever they land, you can start to see, okay, these are the ones that I need to keep satisfied, whether that's regular communication, daily, twice a day, the ones with a lot of influence and power you want to manage closely, make sure that you understand their needs and their wants. Those that have maybe not so much interest and not so much power, but they're just like, hey, just curious about what's going on. You're just monitoring, making sure, checking in, make sure they don't bounce around. So you can start to see, as you plot them out, which groups of stakeholders are going to require additional levels of attention and additional levels of communication to make sure that the project stays on track and isn't derailed. The other tool we want to share with you to help with stakeholder management is what's called a responsibility assignment matrix. Here's an example of one that you can see in the image there, but basically this matrix is a grid that shows what resources are assigned to each work package, or a work package being the activity. So you can see the work breakdown structure as a numerical code that goes with them to define each of the activities. And then we take the team, being the resources, and we go through and we specify who is responsible for the task, who is accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. So that way you can go and make sure that the right people are being involved at the right activities, but we're not over complicating or overburdening different resources that may not need to be involved with certain activities of the project. That's how our responsibility matrix helps with that. So up next, we're going to turn a few minutes over to Kelly to give us an example of how she's applied some of these stakeholder management tools to one of her recent projects working on the state's energy emergency plan. Kelly, we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Skylar. Hi, everyone, again. So with the energy emergency plan, it was exceptionally critical for me to have good stakeholder management skills, because we were talking about updating a plan that had not been updated since 2015, and I would require to establish history of the plan, knowing what was in there when, and to ensure that I have the right team with me to add what needs to be changed and get rid of what doesn't apply. Plus, it's a pretty in-depth plan. So initially, I established my core planning team with the Division of Public Utilities, our Division of Emergency Management, and the Governor's Office of Energy Development. And that was helpful to begin to establish that history and to kind of look at what it would look like to update this plan. And we collectively established a biweekly planning cadence for a few months. That way we could work up to what we were going to accomplish in workshops. As it was a 5-part plan, 2 of the parts would require more subject matter expertise that was outside of our group, which involved many more stakeholders. So with that being said, I had to make sure that I was using all of my stakeholders and my core planning team's time as efficiently as possible, because not only did we need to get this update and review as accurately and as possible, but this is something that we want to do annually. So with that being said, I needed to make sure that I had the buy-in from my subject matter expertise, that they would be good to continue to be involved. So one thing that I didn't do in this process that would have been helpful would have been that responsibility assignment matrix that Skylar was just going over, because with that, I feel as though that would have established more clarity for some of my partners. But with that being said, initially, with that graphic that Skylar just shown, where it's kind of zooming out on stakeholders, that was key to us to be able to have the right people in the room for our workshops and to get the plan updated. And so going forward, I would like to use that responsibility assignment matrix in the years to come. That way everyone's clear and we can do it in a more sustainable amount of time. If anyone has any questions for me about that one, I know we're about to get to having all the questions, but feel free to put something in the chat or speak up. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that example of stakeholder engagement and management in your plan, Kelly. So everybody, that concludes the third tool that we wanted to share with you today from the realm of project management. And like Kelly said, we can take questions related to stakeholder management or just questions in general if you have any. And all 3 of us are here to answer if you have specifics for the examples or whatnot. Feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can come up on your microphone and camera and ask away. All right, looks like we have a quiet group today. Either you guys already understand project management, how it relates to emergency management, or we just shared so much that you're still working through it. But if you do come up with any questions after you're digesting this, or after you go back and watch the recording again, feel free to reach out to any of us that presented today, and we can have more of those conversations and address your questions and share more about project management with you and how applicable it is in emergency management. So with that, thank you for attending today's webinar, and I'll turn it back to you, Jeff.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Skylar, Josh, and Kelly. What great tools and great examples on how to use those tools. You guys did great on your presentation today. As for everybody else on here and watching, as a reminder, this webinar and all other webinars in this series will be available on the DEM website at dem.utah.gov/exercises, or now at dem.utah.gov/iwonder. So our next webinar will be in April. It'll be on earthquake preparedness. It'll be, as well as a reminder that the shakeout will be happening in April as well, and it'll be presented by Wade Matthews. If any of you have any I Wonder topic suggestions, please reach out to me at jeffrankham@utah.gov to have your topic added to our calendar. We're always excited to help you explore and get to know all that DEM can offer the emergency management community. So until next time, keep wondering.